Hey guys, in today's video, I'm going to be going over an interesting and deceptively complicated Scrabble endgame that one of my students recently asked me to analyze as part of a lesson. I'll be leaving the player names anonymous for today's video, but my student was player 2 and her opponent was player 1. In this position, my student, being down at 29 points, found a nice play, the four-way overlap of Phoebe scoring 36 points, which would bring her into the lead by 7 points. The drawback, of course, is that she keeps IIO on her rack, which is going to be difficult to deal with on her next turn. Her opponent, though, also had a bad rack with 2 U's as well as LNOPR. And the opponent here has many winning plays. However, she makes a play that loses, Orlop for 14 points. Now, why this play loses is definitely far from obvious, and that is going to be pretty much the subject of this entire video. After this play, the opponent takes a 7-point lead, 395 to 388, holding NUU, while it's my student's turn, now holding IIO. First, I'm going to show you guys how the game actually progressed. In this position, my student played Oi for 8 points, which initially looks like it makes a ton of sense. She retakes the lead by a point and saves an I, which is going to go out in several places on this board. Her opponent played Nu and Udo for 10, regaining the lead by 9, and after my student went out with T and In for 4, and got 2 bonus points, she ended up losing by 3, 402 to 405. So, Oi, a very intuitive idea in this situation, but it's going to fall short. My student actually has a much higher scoring play available here, Nope and Joe for 15 points. The problem with this play, though, is it only gets rid of one tile and keeps the 2 I's, which are going to be impossible for my student to play simultaneously going forward. So, let's see what would have happened had she done this. She does take an 8-point lead after this play, but her opponent just plays Nu and Udo again, as we saw in the previous position. And now here's the problem. My student is down 2 points, and she can't go out with her 2 I's, and her opponent has 2 spots for the U. She can either play Un to the N in Nu she just opened, or Nu from the N in Sent. And of course, they're on opposite sides of the board, and they can't be blocked simultaneously. So the optimal line here is just my student plays T and In for 4 as she did during the game. Her opponent goes out for 2. And it ends up being a 2-point win for the opponent, 409 to 407. So nope, a cool idea here, but also not quite going to cut it. So at this point in the analysis, I hadn't pulled up the engine or anything, and I was starting to wonder if my student could have actually won this game at all. And then I noticed something. The key idea hit me. Her opponent has not 1, but 2 U's. And when you have 2 U's, having just 2 U spots on the board is not enough. So I had the thought, what if my student blocks one of her opponent's 2 spots for the U? And after the opponent uses the other spot, they'll have no spots remaining and they'll be U stuck. Okay, that's a cool idea, but the problem is Udo on the left-hand part of the board actually cannot be blocked. My student has no way to put a tile in front of the DO, between the DO and the R, or in front of the AL in the way that's going to stop her opponent from playing Udo or Nu and Udo. So this actually can't be blocked. However, it's not the same story for the other use spot, namely Nu from the N and Sent over here. So I start thinking, okay, what if my student, instead of playing Oi as she did during the game, or playing Joe and Nope for maximum score, first drops an I and plays TI for 2 points. Feels really weird to score just 2, but it sets a very dangerous trap for the opponent. Here's the thing. Now, if the opponent plays Nu and Udo, then my student is down 15, but her opponent has only 1 spot for the U, namely Un on the left, because she has preemptively blocked the U spot from the N and Sent. So now, she doesn't go out with Ion for 9, after all, this loses by 4. Instead, she sticks her opponent by playing In for just 2 points. Why In for just 2? Well, after her opponent is now forced to pass because she can't play her U, my student now and only now plays Nope and Joe for 15 points as an outplay and steals this game 409 to 405. But that certainly doesn't mean that TI for 2 is a guaranteed win. After all, her opponent doesn't have to play Nu and Udo. Another similar option is Undo for 7 points. However, this is going to do no better for the opponent, as just as before, my student is going to play In for 2 to stick her opponent with a U, and I'll leave you guys to check that after an opponent's pass and going out with Joe and Nope, my student wins easily once again. So now you might be thinking, okay, that's all cool, but what if the opponent just drops the U and plays Udo for 6? The idea here is now the opponent is actually threatening to go out with Un and Nu. And if you look at the board closely, my student, after this play, is going to be unable to block. Because after this, my student can't put an O or an I in front of this U, and un and nu is coming down for 4 and an outplay on the next turn. And playing nope is not going to be enough, because after this, and un and nu for 4, it's going to be a tie game, but the opponent gets 2 bonus points as they went out, and my student will lose by 2, 405 to 407. However, after Udo, my student doesn't need to slow play. She can just go out with Oi for 8 points as she did during the actual game. That brings her to within 3, and then she gets 2 times 2 or 4 bonus points from my opponent's unplayed N and U, so now she ends up winning by just 1, 402 to 401. Why did going out here work when it didn't in the line where the opponent played NU? Well, it's a very simple explanation. In this line, not only did her opponent score less by playing Udo versus NU, she also has an extra tile left on her rack after playing Udo. Now she's getting caught with NU, not just the U. So my student ends up netting a lot more points in this line by forcing her opponent to just play Udo instead of NU. However, there's still one more line we need to look at that the opponent could respond with after TI. The opponent could actually completely ignore the Udo spot and first play Yen and In for 8 points. This looks absolutely bizarre. After all, the opponent is going to struggle to play off 1 U, let alone 2 Us. However, the idea is that if my student is often going to slow play her way to victory, the opponent can sometimes slow play herself to try to milk as many points as possible. So this is an interesting idea that deserves to be investigated. After this play, the opponent would be up 13. So my student cannot just go out for 8 points. I'll leave you guys to check the math. This would result in a 1-point loss. So my student now has to slow play, this time with Joe and Nope for 15, taking a 2-point lead. Udo comes down. Note that my student had no legal way to block Udo, so Udo comes down for 6. My student goes out for 4 and ends up winning by 2 after the bonus, 411 to 409. So there you have it, guys. That proves that TI for 2 points, a bizarre-looking play, is indeed a winning play for my student in this position, and as it turns out, as the Macondo engine confirms, is the only winning play. The only way my student can win is if she forces her opponent to get stuck with a U by blocking the 1 U spot she can, and allowing her opponent only to play off 1 U before being stuck with the second U. Super interesting stuff, and a surprisingly complicated endgame for a position where both players only have 3 tiles left on their rack and they're all 1-pointers, normally not a situation conducive to a lot of fireworks. Now, before I close out this video, let's just go back a turn. I mentioned that Orlop in this position for the opponent was, as we saw, of course, a losing play if my student were to find TI, but the opponent here had several winning plays. Even the simple Dorp for 24 points should win pretty easily, according to Macondo. Now, this doesn't look much better because, after all, the opponent still has 2 U's to deal with. But here's the key difference. Well, actually, 2 key differences. Number 1, Dorp scores 10 more points than Orlop. That's a huge amount of points in this close a game with both players having all 1-pointers and thus minimal scoring potential. We saw that my student would have won by a single point in the optimal line, so 10 points is going to really go a long way in ensuring the opponent holds on. The other thing is it's actually beneficial for the opponent to hold on to other tiles besides the U's. If she's stuck with the U's, then at least if she has other tiles, she can use those to score some points while my student is slow playing and racking up as much as she can. I'll show you an example line after Dorp. Here, my student might respond with something like Ion for 10 points, trying to score and go out in 2, after which the opponent can just drop the O with Nope for 15, and after Bye for 4, the opponent wins easily 420 to 410. If instead my student tries to slow play with Nope herself, taking advantage of the fact that the opponent is stuck with the U's, then, as I said before, the opponent takes advantage of having extra tiles besides the U's. She can just play something like Oral and Low for 12, and my student is simply not getting enough points for her 2 I's. After a play like Bye for 4 and Yen for 8, gladly accepting that she's going to get caught with both U's, the opponent will win by 10 points after my student goes out with T and In for 4 and gets 4 bonus points, 425 to 415. So, Dorp easily would have been enough for the opponent to win. An even more straightforward way for the opponent to win would be to play Runlet for 12 points to the Et on the board. This is more straightforward because the opponent is going out multiple places with the word Upo. She can play Upo and Plug down the D column for 17, upo under the S of stinky or making so, or even a pawn to the N of runlet, and my student, of course, cannot block all of these simultaneously, so the game would end with my student dropping an O with no per 15, and the opponent going out with her highest scoring play of upo and plug for 17, and the opponent wins easily 414 to 403. This is certainly much easier to calculate than any of the other lines we looked at, and is a good reminder why usually if you can find an out in 2, that's going to not only be the best way to win, but also the least stressful way to win. So I think the biggest lesson here, guys, from the opponent's perspective is try to always find an out in 2 that wins an endgame if possible. It's generally the most effective technique and the easiest to calculate. And if you can't find an out in 2, be very, very mindful, especially on closed boards like this, if you might get stuck with a tile. And I think the lesson from the student side here is whenever you're in a situation when you feel like you can't win with normal methods like an out and 2, think about some outside of the box things. Like really take a close look at what tiles your opponent have and ask yourself, are they going to be able to play them? And especially when they have more than one of the same tile and that tile individually is difficult to play like the U, you should really be asking yourself whether there's any way you can stick them with that tile, because as we saw, sticking someone with a tile can be super powerful and force them to pass, and you can get extra valuable time to rack up more points with your tiles, even if they are individually low scoring. So very instructive game, guys. Hope you enjoyed that analysis. Hope you got something out of it. If you ever win an endgame like this, definitely let me know. And yeah, thanks for watching, guys. Appreciate your support. Hope you have a great rest of your day, and I'll see you all soon for the next video. Bye-bye.